Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Phillip Mason Show, where acquiring wisdom is king, learning is home centered and lifelong, resulting in great decisions in your education, career, and entrepreneurial path. I'm your host, Phillip Mason, and I am thrilled to have this time with you today in episode number 13. In this episode today, I created this one specifically for you as I know you had a rough start coming out of high school, going into the world of work, going into school, and just trying to get started with your business ideas. I know it was a tough transition. And so I've felt to make this episode for you, and I think it'll help you understand one of the reasons why that was such a difficult transition going out of the public schools into the real world, trying to get started with your career. And this is one of the biggest reasons why you've struggled with wisdom in your life. And I think the answer today to this problem is going to surprise you a little bit. And perhaps you'll see things in a light you haven't seen them before. So schools today, our public schools today in America, they have this culture of popularity. They have a pop culture to them. And the culture that's in our schools a lot of times reflects the culture that's out in society. And really, our schools should have a culture of learning to them, not a pop culture to them, not a culture of popularity among the people who are in the school. And so our public schools today really are a barometer or a mirror of popular culture that we see out in society. And so our public schools today are actually a pretty good indicator of what society will be like over the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And it's a good reflection of where our country's headed if you go and look at our public schools today. Now, it's kind of interesting. There's a great Scottish philosopher, Thomas Reid. He's one of the great thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment and one of the great intellectual giants of that period. And even today, his writings have become classic. They're just super powerful, and I highly recommend them. So he actually wrote what's called The Inquiry into the Human Mind. And in his conclusion, chapter 7 of his conclusion, Thomas Reid, he talks about the ways of reflection. So he's a philosopher, and he talks about, people should spend their time in the way of reflection, pondering, meditating, thinking. Our brains have this unique ability to be able to look down and to understand its own thinking, which is a very unique gift, right? That we have. Our brains have this ability to be able to step back and look back on ourselves, our thinking, and our imaginations, and be able to reflect upon our own thinking, which makes us different than all the other creatures out here on God's green earth in many, many respects. So he writes this in his conclusion. I'm just going to read this little quote that he wrote. And in his book, he's really trying to understand the human mind, and he's trying to understand human nature as related to the mind. And he's also talking about what other philosophers have said over the ages, and he's kind of shooting holes in their theories and saying, you know what, there's some things that just aren't right, and we need to spend a little bit more time thinking and reflecting on what is actually right, what is actually true. And so he makes this observation. So listen carefully. He says, but this attention and reflection is so hard for us, surrounded as we are by external objects that constantly claim our attention, that it has been very little practiced, even by philosophers. So this is so good. I'm going to read this one more time. So you've got to understand what he's saying here. But this attention and reflection is so hard for us, surrounded as we are by external objects that constantly claim our attention, that it has been very little practiced, even by philosophers, philosophers are in search of wisdom. That's the purpose of being a philosopher, is to figure out how things work in the world around you, how the human brain works, how the human nature works, right? How the human spirit works. That's what a philosopher is supposed to figure out. But he's saying even philosophers have a hard time doing this. They don't spend enough time reflecting and thinking upon their own thinking. And and he says one of the reasons why is because we get so distracted. There's so many things around us that distract us from what's most important and from understanding our own thoughts and our own feelings. And he says, we're surrounded by external objects that constantly claim our attention. And that's the way it is in our public schools here in America. Students are constantly surrounded by things, by objects, by other people who constantly claim their attention. And we have this popularity culture in our American schools, and it's been going on for decades, 8, 9, 10 decades at least. And it's a big problem. It keeps students from learning. It keeps them from growing. It keeps them from becoming great because they're worried about being popular. And that's not good. When their full focus is on being popular, it robs them of the energy that they could be using to learn, to read, to do arithmetic, to study, to discuss with other students these great topics, these great works of literature, and what the great minds have said, like Thomas Reed. Um, you know, I almost know very few public courses that study Thomas Reed, but he wrote some amazing things, and he should be studied. If if not in high school, for sure in college. A lot of colleges don't even touch Reed at all, and that's something that's missing from our schools. Now, let me give you a few reasons of why I think we have a popularity culture in America, and I hope it's actually obvious to you that we have this problem. I hope just the fact that I brought it to your attention, I hope you can reflect over your own experience and you'll recognize, yeah, Philip's right. I lived that popularity culture when I was in school. It's a very real thing. But let's go in depth here. Let's talk about this a little bit more, okay? And think about this perhaps maybe in a way that we haven't thought about it. So when students are in school, we know it robs them of energy to keep up with the Joneses, to keep up with what other students are doing so that they can fit in and feel a part of things. And so what are some of the ways that students do this? Well, one of the ways that I've seen it as a teacher and as a student myself, is I see students doing things that don't actually fit their talents and skills and gifts, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it could be a good thing. They may discover something they're actually good at, or they may discover that they're not good at it, and that may be beneficial. But a lot of times they miss out on the classes that they should be taking or the extracurricular activities they should be taking because they're so worried about fitting in with the cool crowd or the good crowd. I say cool because, in the 1980s, 1990s, when I was going to school, you said cool, you wanted to be cool. And that's all what school is about, was being cool. And I know students today use a different vernacular and use different words, and some of them which don't make any sense to me at all today, but they use them because that's what YouTube has taught them to say, or that's what popular culture has taught them to say. And they say it because it's cool, not because it makes sense. But we see this in the public schools. We see students who take elective classes because they think it will make them appear smart to others, or it will earn them kudos with the outside world, or with what's politically correct, or what's popular with other adults, or popular with administration, or with other students in their clique, whatever it is, right? We also see students who sign up for sports, for clubs, extracurricular activities, because they think it'll help them become popular, and 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 then they just want to be liked. Like, they just have this desire to be liked, and they do it even though it may not be a good fit for them. It sometimes it just totally kills me. Like, I think it's great that we have some students that go out and try it for these sports teams, and they literally go out and play, and they have no athletic ability whatsoever, and they go out and they play, and it becomes kind of a humiliating thing for them. And I'm grateful that they get an opportunity to go do something that they're not good at. But at the same time, they could have been spending time and energy going into something that they are good at and shining and growing and developing their skills. But popular culture has told them, hey, you got to go try out for the basketball team. You've got to try out for the football team. You've got to put those pads on or you're not legit. And that's just really not the way it should be. And, it's kind of interesting to me, parents, they shop for their children so that they can have the same material things as the cool kids or the popular kids. And it's interesting, you watch students on the first day of school, a lot of their conversation revolves around, "Hey, what kind of shoes did you get? Hey, where'd you get that jacket? Hey, what kind of jeans are you wearing? What brand names do you have? Man, that's a nice watch. What kind of watch is that? What kind of smartwatch is that?" And they're talking about the things that they have in common with each other, and you can see these little divides and these little groups that are occurring in the classroom because they're separating themselves out by their goods, by their material possessions, by who has the nice clothes, who has the nice electronic gadgets, whatever it is that's cool and popular. And so parents spend a lot of time spending a lot of money on their kids so that they can fit in at school. And it's kind of sad. Now, you're welcome to buy whatever you want to buy. And that's what's great about living in America. But if you're buying stuff just so your kid can fit in at school, I think there's a fundamental moral problem there. Now, if now I know you believe what I'm telling you because you've experienced this yourself. But let's think about this from like an entertainment industry perspective. If we think about what the entertainment world has thrown at you and I, the entertainment industry, it totally glorifies popularity culture in schools. It's everywhere. I mean, you can't even get away from it. Like, it's everywhere. It's in almost every single movie. It's in almost every single TV show. So I just made a short list here of movies here in recent times, and we could certainly go way back. But here's just a list of movies. I made a little list here. I'll just read it off to you. So the first one is these are titles. So Bring It On, High School Musical, The Duff, Things I Hate About You, and Mean Girls. So there's 5 movies that are all about popularity culture in our public schools. I also made a list of TV shows here in recent times, and this is a little bit longer list, but I mean, this is just, I mean, we're just kind of scratching the surface here. There's just so much more out there in the entertainment industry that glorifies popularity culture. So, Riverdale, Euphoria, Never Have I Ever, Glee, Gossip Girl, 13 Reasons Why, Zoe 101, Victorious, Gen V, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. And I had to throw this one in because this was really popular when I was in high school. Saved by the Bell. I know it's a little bit older. When I was a teenager, that was what was really popular. And guess what? Saved by the Bell, one of the main themes in that TV series is popularity. Who's cool, right? Who's who's got the right clothes on? Who's in the right sport, who's in the right club, who's got the cool car, right? That's what Saved by the Bell is all about. And, our entertainment industry has totally shaped our public schools. And I also think it's the other way around. I really believe it's a two-way street. I really believe we have a lot of people that have been through public schools and they've gone out and worked in the entertainment industry and they've kind of said, "Hey, this is my experience in the public schools." And, we poison our own well. We go out and we watch entertainment, and the entertainment tells us that we need to be cool, we need to be popular, and that school isn't really school unless you're cool and you fit in and you can be popular, right? And that's honestly not the way school should be. School should be a very important environment, a very safe environment, a very protected environment where people can go and learn and study, where learning is cool, where studying is cool, where reading is cool, and you can be validated in that. And in most of our public schools, that's not happening. Instead, there's this cool culture, and which says, I'm such and so I'm valid, and you're not valid. And that kind of culture totally kills learning, and it kills people too. It kills their spirits. It kills their mental capacity. It makes them afraid. It makes them scared. It makes them worried. And they're worried about all these things except for learning and studying the things that they came to that school in the first place to learn and study. So hopefully I'm framing up this problem for you well, and you're understanding it the way I see it and the way I've experienced it, and the way I think most people in America can experience it as they go into the real world. And I know that you've experienced this and you've been through this. Now, it doesn't really stop there. We see school administrators who struggle with this too, right? We have administrators in our public schools that do what's popular with the most vocal and the most popular parents. Period. We have administrators who seek to be popular with their students, and they avoid disciplining their students, and they hand out awards to students that don't necessarily deserve those awards. And it just creates the wrong message, creates the wrong environment. But it doesn't stop there. This is something that affects teachers too. Teachers get sucked into this popularity culture too. So we have teachers who seek to be popular with their students so that they can be liked. And so they have less work to do. They have fewer parent-teacher conferences, fewer grades to put in the grade book. And who can blame them, right? They're they get sucked into this and their life can be miserable if they don't fit into that popularity culture, right? Just like the student, if the student doesn't fit in with the rest of the class or the rest of the student body, then life can be kind of miserable for them, right? We all want to belong. We all want to feel like we belong. So being a teacher and being an administrator, it's an awful lot like running for political office. You're always trying to improve your popularity so you can keep your job, you can keep your office, right? As an administrator or as a teacher, it's very much a public position. And part of your job as a teacher is to remain popular. An administrator does not want to keep you around unless you're popular with the students, popular with the parents, right? And I think it's important to discern here that there's a difference between being a good teacher and a popular teacher. And a good teacher can be valued and cherished by parents and students, right? And so I want to distinguish between that there are good teachers who do the right thing and are really creating a culture of learning in the school. And there are parents and students that cherish them, and that message gets passed on in the administration. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is many teachers who desire to be cherished and respected, but they go about it in the wrong way because they're caught up in this culture. And so they want to be cool, they want to be popular, and so they do things that aren't necessarily the best things or the right things to do so that they can look good in the eyes of the administrator, they can look good in the eyes of the students, they can look good in the eyes of the parents. And so that's a problem. For me, I one of the things that I realize as I look back on my public school experience, I had a handful of teachers, and I can name every single one of them, and they had a huge impact on my life. And I'm sorry, I'm having an emotional moment here just thinking about them because they changed my life. They did. They totally changed my life. But I did not appreciate them in the moment as I should have. I thought they were hard. I sometimes thought they were unfair, and I sometimes thought I knew better than they did. And so sometimes I even complained about them, or I complained directly to them and told them that they were not fair and that they were being mean. and and now looking back as an adult, as I look back on my experience in the public school system, I realized those teachers were good teachers. They were great teachers. And they did what was right, not because they were trying to be fit in or be popular, but they did it because they wanted to help me learn. And that made all the difference. And that's why I'm having an emotional moment right here. And I wasn't planning on doing this. And so excuse my tears, but they made a difference in my life. And that's the power of a good learning culture. And we can see that in public schools is that you can have some teachers who have this culture in their classroom that totally pushes out that popularity culture that's in the rest of the school. And they say, in my classroom, things are going to be different. And they get pushback from the rest of the school. Sometimes they get pushback from administrators. But the good parents and the good students, they know what are the right teachers to take because they know in those classes they're actually going to learn something from those teachers. And I'm so grateful I mean, I am so thankful. So grateful for those teachers who took the time to teach me and to create a culture of learning in their classroom. And their classes were hard. They were. And I struggled with them. And I didn't always get good grades in their classes. And they weren't afraid to give me a bad grade if I didn't earn it or if I didn't meet the standard. And you know what? I was okay with that. In the long run, I'm okay with that. In the short term, I may not have been. But I learned that those are the best teachers who do what's right. And they seek to have a learning culture in their classroom. And I think there will always be good teachers like that in any school system, in any setting, who are trying to do what is right. And they buck that popularity trend and they buck the trend of trying to do whatever is popular or whatever makes them fit in or whatever makes things flow easily. And so I think in our society today, we need teachers who are not afraid to correct students because they might be perceived as being mean or not popular. We need teachers who can be adults and can tell a student, you know, you didn't actually do the homework correctly, or there's actually a better way to do that, or your behavior is not appropriate right now, and you need some appropriate discipline to be able to help you understand that you're not acting appropriately in class or in the school, or you're not treating others well. We need teachers that have that fortitude to stand up and to be leaders in the classroom for their students. But in our society, it's not easy to be a leader and to buck the culture. It's not. And it's most often it turns into a grease fire or a cheese grater for the teacher that's trying to do what's right. And that's why so few teachers and so few administrators are able to do what's right. And that's why the culture continues to stay that way. And rather than having a learning culture, you get that popularity culture instead because it's hard to change because the parents and the students push against it and just everything in society pushes against it. Popular culture pushes against it. Political culture, you know, if it's not politically correct, they'll push against it too. And that's a lot of force on teachers and administrators. You know, and you see this with administrators too. They're afraid to discipline their students for breaking school rules because mom and dad think they're overstepping their bounds. And that administrator doesn't want to have a hard conversation with mom and dad. They, they want to stay popular with mom and dad. They want to stay popular with the PTO, right? They don't want to lose clout with them. So, you thought you were doing well in school because you had, good grades, because you were winning the popularity contests. But then that day came when you had the reality of getting a business off the ground. You had the reality of sitting in college classes with professors who didn't care if you showed up to class and didn't care whether or not you passed their class. And then you had the experience of showing up to work and having a manager who didn't appreciate you being late to work and was not impressed when you messed up every fifth customer order. And you couldn't have mom and dad schedule a parent teacher conference with that manager to tell them that you were right and they were wrong. And so you've had this major paradigm shift from high school to the real world, to that career path that you're seeking after. And so this popularity culture is kind of what was holding you back as you transition from public schools into your career path, into college, into that first job, and into your first business endeavors. So, given that as the framework here, this is your situation, this is my situation. What if we asked a few questions? What if we could make learning popular again? Instead of trying to be popular with others, what if we just really focused on making learning cool again? Wouldn't that be awesome? What if we could make learning from the great books, the best books, the popular thing to do? What if we could make studying the principles of freedom the popular thing to do in the United States or in Europe or anywhere around the globe? What if we could make studying the liberal arts popular again? It used to be a very common thing in the United States to study the liberal arts. That was normal. 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, even into the 1900s, even into 1950, that was something that was really commonly done in the United States, and probably even into the 60s and 70s, you can make a claim for that. But we've totally lost it though here in the United States. Like there's just little pockets of people and schools and homeschool programs where they study the liberal arts. Our curriculum has totally departed from those important subjects in so many different ways. Now, a lot of times when people think of the liberal arts, there's a lot of things that get conjured up in their mind. There's sometimes people think about the Democratic Party, they think about being a liberal in the political sense, and it's just really confusing to them. So, liberal in the old classical sense means, your liberty or your freedom. And so if we go back, liberal arts literally comes from the Latin, if we go back far enough. And so if we go back to the Romans, a free man in Roman society, there were certain topics that he studied that were really important for his success and for his freedom. And he stayed free if he studied those topics. And so the Romans understood that if someone had this certain type of education, you would remain free. If you didn't have it, you would be a bondsman. You would be in captivity. You would be in servitude. And the Romans had slaves. It was really common for freemen to have slaves in the Roman time period. And it's kind of interesting. The Romans also, depending on what time period you're looking at, the Romans actually would grant freedom to their slaves. These are slaves who would improve themselves, they would study, they would serve their master well. And if they did that well, and if they improved themselves and they studied those topics, the master would actually give them and grant them their freedom, and they could go on to run their own businesses, be an entrepreneur. They could go on to have an important position or job, and they could make a big difference in society. They could have their own library. They could have their own learning. They could get schooling, and they could become a great person in Roman society. Think about that. That's really quite remarkable. Now, I know in our American culture, we're 110% against slavery, right? And we don't want anything to do with that. And, but that was a very common thing anciently to have slaves. But I think it's fascinating that the Romans had a very clear understanding of what freedom meant. And they understood that freedom was preserved through education, and that if you didn't want to be a servant or a slave anymore, then you had to get that type of education in order to become a free person. Pretty fascinating, huh? So anciently, in antiquity, we think of, in the classical sense, we think of a good education. There's the 7 liberal arts. So let's kind of talk through this for a moment, because I think this is important to understand to have this basis. So the 7 liberal arts. So it was broken up into 2 parts. The first part focused on language and thinking. And so we call that the trivium. So the trivium included grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And every student had an opportunity to study those 3 topics. And they would also study what's called the quadrivium. So they were the mathematical arts. So that body of knowledge that was more mathematical. So the quadrivium, that included arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Those were the 4 core parts of the quadrivium, hence the name. And so those 7 topics is what people studied classically. That's what helped preserve freedom, as if you had those arts. That's what would qualify you for public service in the Roman Senate or in your local judiciary or local legislative branch. And you had to have those skills or talents to be an entrepreneur in Roman society, to be a public servant in Roman society. They were very critical, and you couldn't not have that education and make it work. And if you think about our day and time today, we have a lot of people who are in public office today, and haven't had anything close to this type of classical education, and yet they're making decisions for us. And they would highly benefit from having this good, solid education. They would make a lot better decisions. So it's very unfortunate. And the more that you get this kind of education, the more you realize, there's literally hundreds of people in government who are making decisions for me who don't understand a lot about how the world works, and they don't understand a lot about the principles of freedom. Now, we've had a lot of growth over the last 3 or 400 years, and the knowledge that we have as human beings has grown vastly, and we're just so grateful that that's the way it's gone. It's been exponential growth, and I give all tribute to God for that. Like I think there's just been a rapid outpouring of knowledge like we've never seen before. I don't think it's been just us as humans through our own scientific inquiry that's discovered all that knowledge. I think there's been a lot of reasons why we've seen an explosion in knowledge over the last 3 to 400 years, especially when you consider, the previous 4 or 5,000 years where there just hasn't, there's been great periods of knowledge, but generally speaking, the level of knowledge has stayed relatively the same through most of human history, and all of a sudden it's been ramping up and growing. I really believe that there's some special things happening in our time frame. And so if we think about liberal arts today, what does that mean in a modern sense? We've talked about it in a classical sense, but those topics have expanded so much. I actually just put together a list of other topics that would fall under those liberal arts. Now, some of you might say, well, that sounds like my normal, public school lineup of classes. And it may be, but the types of books that you read in those topics, the great books, the classic books, and how you go about learning from them, there's a night and day difference. So you may have the title or topic in your public school, but to do it in um, from a great book's perspective, to do it with the best thinkers of that era and to do it with real rigor and with real, as Thomas Reed says, with real reflection in the ways of reflection, it's a totally different experience. And so I hope you understand that difference as I go through these topics. So I made a list. I'm just going to go through it and read it. So, and there's more topics than this, but I mean, our human knowledge has expanded so much. So economics is a new liberal art liberal art topic that's grown in the last 300 years, in a wonderful way. Geography, literature, government structures, principles of freedom, philosophy. The classics are the great books, like I've been talking about. So we're talking about beyond the Romans and Greeks, beyond their classics. We have a lot of wonderful classics from the Enlightenment periods. And from the Renaissance periods, we also have wonderful classics just in the last 100, 200, 300 years that are just absolutely phenomenal. And we should all read them. World religions, art history, psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, public policy, biology, chemistry, physics, environmental science, modern astronomy, which is different than the ancient astronomy. There's some very key differences there. Both are very beneficial, but very key differences. And then even developing now in our age, computer science, data science, those are becoming very important topics to have knowledge on because our world is being shaped so much by those new emerging technologies that we have to have a foundation in those. So let me ask you this question. What is the solution to this popularity problem that we have in our schools? So I have a very simple solution. I realize that, people out in the world may not think that this is a good solution and they may think it's too simple. But I know that you will take hold of this solution and I know that you will use it to change your life and do something with it because of the type of person you are. So my solution, really the answer to this problem that we have is to read. We need to start reading. We need to love to read and we need to read more. And we need to read to learn, not to read to impress other people. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, you know what? I'm I'm 45. It's too late for me. I'm already deep in my career. I can't change now. Or I'm 65 and I'm supposed to be retiring now. And I'm just my brain's getting old. I don't know if I can do that. Or you may be thinking, gosh, I just finished college and you're telling me my degree's not worth anything? And you mean I have to read more now that I'm out of college? And I know that some people are thinking that, but I know that you will know that it doesn't matter what age you are. It's never too late to start learning. You're never too old to start growing and improving and changing. You can do that at any point in your life, at any point. You absolutely can, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Education is not something that young people do at school. Education should be your primary focus in life, and it should be done throughout your whole life. And, for you, for this is something that is taught in Christianity. And Jesus Christ taught this to his followers to learn, to study, to grow. And, if you look at, the Bible, all of the ancient prophets, they had a huge focus on learning and growing and teaching. And why would that be? Well, the glory of God is intelligence. God knows everything. And if you want to improve your life, you have to know something. And you can't know anything without first reading and discussing the great thoughts of the world, the great ideas, the great theories, the great principles, the great truths that are found in this world with other people who have spent time thinking about them themselves and then writing about them, getting excited about them, and speaking about them with others. That's how you learn. That's how you solve this problem of this popularity issue, this popularity culture that we find in our society, that we find in our schools. That's how you kill that culture and you bring back that learning culture. It's just, you just start reading, you start learning. You can do that at any time, at any point, period. End of story. You can do it now. You may want to reconsider the school you're attending right now. You may want to consider, a private school, a religious school, or a home study program, or a combination of those. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I've, in my formal education, my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and now I'm currently working on my PhD. I'm in the middle of that. I've chosen a church-sponsored school for all three of my programs, all different schools, and in fact, all different churches have sponsored those schools. But I've had a good positive experience in all of those schools, and I've gotten the type of education that I've desired. I directly tie that back to the religious pinnings of that school because of the ideology, because of the principles of truth that are there that school is anchored on. I think it's made a huge difference in my education. And that may not be what's right for you in your situation right now, but that's what was right for me in my situation. Now, if you're in a school where popularity is killing the learning culture, then create your own little microculture. And if you feel like it's not the right thing to do to leave that school, then build your own little microculture and, recruit a real friend, someone that really cares about you to help you make learning really exciting again. Find a study buddy and start learning together. And maybe that person is at home. Maybe it's another friend that's not even going to school who has a desire to learn. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a mentor you've had from work. Maybe it's someone else who's willing to discuss topics with you, who's willing to read books with you and have discussions on them and make learning cool again. You know, one of the things I think you need to do right now is to build up your own personal library. Or start visiting your local library and checking out books on by legit authors on these topics that we've talked about today. And not just any old book, but find the best thinkers, the great thinkers who have written the great books, and start there and read those great books. And as you read those books, you will quickly be able to understand the difference between a good book and a great book, and and especially between a bad book and a good book, um, because you've read the great books and you know how the best thinkers think and the best ideas how they come about. And so you can create your own little microculture if you're in a school where popularity culture is reigning and you want to be able to have your learning culture. So I think that's something that you can do now to kind of change your situation. Now, it's kind of interesting. Our family has a problem and we have too many books in our house and they're overwhelming all of our different bookcases. And so I actually built a custom bookcase. It's 10 feet wide and it's floor to ceiling bookcase. And we did it because we wanted to better accommodate our family library. And it's exciting. It's great. And my kids love our new library, our new bookcase. And they think it's so great. And the crazy thing is it still doesn't hold all of our books. And so we're going to have to I'm probably going to have to build some more bookshelves. So our library is growing and it's exciting and there's so many great books on it. And it's so fun to look at it and see all those books and say, okay, what do I want to study today? And, or what book am I going to grab and discuss with my children today? And it's thrilling to see all those different books and to think about all the amazing things that you can study. And my kids think it's so cool. And why do they think it's cool? It's because mom and dad are leading out in the home and we've set the example. My wife and I have set the example and we're making it exciting. We're making it cool to read, to study, to write, to learn, to discuss. Learning is cool in our home. And so my kids think it's cool. Do you want to do something really cool with me? Cool is my favorite word to use here today. Let's start a trend. Let's make it cool to have a library again. That's what cool people used to do in America in the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s was to build up their own personal libraries. That's what the cool people did. In fact, that's what the successful people did, more importantly. All the people that accomplished their dreams and made things happen, those are the people that had libraries. And if they didn't have one, they found ways to get books. And, you know, and some of them were so successful that even helped create libraries for people who couldn't get libraries. Benjamin Franklin, for example, Thomas Jefferson, for example, they understood the importance of those books. So, let's make it a trend. Let's make it important to start your own library. Way before it was cool in America to have a library, it was cool in Europe to develop your own personal library. Even for hundreds of years before it was in America, that's what all the great thinkers did, all the great minds in Europe did, was they built up their own libraries. It's interesting, in the 1950s, my grandfather, he built a custom home back when building a custom home was affordable. And there wasn't as much inflation in the United States back then. But he built this home, and as you walk into the home, it had this nice little foyer. And immediately you could see into the living room. So the living room had something prominently featured in it. What do you think that was? It wasn't the TV. It was his library. It was his bookcase. He had a custom bookcase built into the wall, and it was built into the fireplace mantle too. So you had the fireplace, and then you had the custom book shelving. You had the custom library right there. And then across from the fireplace and the library was a piano. Those were the prominent things in his living room. And it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. And of course, you had the nice rocking armchair there so you could have a place to read your book next to the fireplace. So charming, so beautiful. Such a refuge from the world. Such a great place to just learn, and a lot of homes are not set up that way today. But I think you and I can change that. And I think we can influence others to change that. Let's make it cool again to have a personal library. Let's make it cool again to learn. Let's change the popularity culture and let's make it a learning culture. Let's make it so that all of us can be successful because we've read the right books. My friend, it has been an honor for me to be with you today. I hope my thoughts have lifted you, have inspired you, and have helped you to see that your experience in the public school system is what was holding you back from being successful in your career, in your business opportunities, and in your first employment opportunities, and even in college. It actually prevented you from being successful in the way that you wanted to be because of that, in part because of that popularity culture, in big part, I should say. I hope this will motivate you to change and to improve your life and to start reading now and start making a difference in your own life and not to worry about what's going on in the outside world. Don't let it influence you anymore. You just focus on what you're doing and you start learning what you can learn and start improving your life now, and you will be successful. If you learn and gather this knowledge and apply it, you will be successful. No doubt about it. You just focus on what you're doing and stop worrying about trying to impress other people, or stop trying to do what you think will impress the world and what you think they want you to do or what they think is the right thing to do. You study, you learn, and you discern what is the right thing for you to do based on your talents, your gifts, and your abilities. And as you learn, you study, you will find the answer to this. Study those topics. Learn learn something about all those topics. Get a basic knowledge in all those topics. And you will hit certain topics and your mind will just explode. You'll have all this light come into your mind and you'll just know that topic is for me. I'm a genius at biology, or I'm a genius at philosophy, or I am brilliant with literature, or I am fantastic at physics. Whatever it is, whatever your area is, and on those areas, that's where you want to go in really deep. Go in very, very deep and study your heart out and learn those really well and develop the skills and talents that go around that body of knowledge. And that's really the solution to this popularity problem that we have in America, is we need people who will get the breadth of education and in that process discover where their gifts and talents lies. And on those 3 or 4 topics, and maybe it's just one topic, go really deep. Go as deep as you can go and become an expert, become a great thinker in that field. And that will change your life. It'll change the world. It'll change our nation. It'll change your family. And it'll just change everything that's good about you and make it even better. And that's my belief. And I hope that you'll take this and just run with it. Thanks again for the time today. This has been a great episode. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to visiting with you on our next episode. God bless.